So hi everyone, my name is Sarah Gingold and I'm one of the hosts of today's events where we'll be talking about changes to the National Disability Insurance Scheme or the NDIS. Just a quick visual description of me. I'm a white woman, short brown hair. I'm wearing a cardigan that I crocheted and and a purple top. So first I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather. I'm joining you from unceded land of the Wurundjeri people. I also want to pay my respects to all elders and ancestors and to any First Nations people here today. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. If you feel comfortable, you can share the lands you're joining us from in the chat today. A bit about me. I'm the editor-in-chief of DSC's Resource Hub. I'm also a person with disability. In my spare time, I like reading, art, animals, etc. And in my job at DSC, I actually work with Todd, who's also going to be co-hosting today.
Hi everyone, my name is Todd Winther. As Sarah mentioned, I'm one of the co-hosts today. I am wearing a dark shirt with short, almost grey hair. I'm in a motorised wheelchair and I'm around about 40 years old. Just in case anyone is wondering, we do visual descriptions of ourselves so that people who have vision impairments or low vision know who is speaking and what they look like. It's part of making meetings accessible for everyone as much as possible. Today's event has live captioning, and Auslan available. Please feel free to turn on your multi-pin to ensure you can always see the Auslan interpreters, even when we share our screen today. For those of you who haven't been here before, welcome. The Disability Dialogue Collaborative Project is sponsored between a number of groups, including the Disability Advocacy Network Australia, Inclusion Australia, Alliance 20, and the Melbourne Disability Institute. It's funded through an information linkages and capacity building grant from the Department of Health, Disability and Ageing.
Now, before we get into the content, we would just want to do some housekeeping really quickly. It's really important to us today to create a safe, open and inclusive space. So firstly, AI tools are not allowed. We do know they can be useful tools for people with disability, but we just want to protect everyone's privacy. We will be uploading a transcript of the event page shortly after the event is over, and we'll also send a recording to you via email. Secondly, we try really hard to stick to time and make sure we hear from all our guests, and we have a very full content today, as you can imagine. This might mean sometimes we interrupt to move things along. We promise we're not being rude. We just really want to stick to the time and hear from everyone. We would also encourage you to have your camera on if you're comfortable with that, so that we can sort of just feel like we're in the room together, but it's up to you. We would also love to see your questions and comments in the chat. We may not have time to get to every question, but we will do our best.
We want to acknowledge that today's topic might bring up some difficult feelings. So if you would like some support, you can visit www.disabilitydialogue.com.au/support to find a list of resources available. We'll also put a link in the chat. You can take a break from the event at any time. Today's event is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the Disability Dialogue website. So please be aware when you're sharing things that on behalf of yourself or other people, it will be public knowledge and other people might be watching the recording after the event. So just be mindful of what you share.
Yes. All right, now let's get started. So a lot of us are feeling quite uncertain, worried, frustrated at the moment. And this is because the Minister for the NDIS, Mark Butler, has recently announced some really big changes to the NDIS. These changes could potentially lead to more than 200,000 people being removed from the NDIS and cuts to capacity building and social, civic and community participation budgets. This is daunting. We feel it. So we really want to create a safe space today to talk about these changes honestly and clearly, and we want to give it the time and attention it deserves in a space that's created by and for people with disability. So with that in mind, let's start by talking about what this means for people with disability. And one thing that's quite important to say is that the changes we'll be talking about today have not started yet. So for them to happen, the government needs to pass legislation, and that legislation is currently before Parliament. Many of you would have seen the Senate inquiry, and we just learned yesterday that the Senate inquiry is going to be extended until August, and the legislation cannot pass until after this. Now, before the event, we did share a survey with everyone who registered. No worries if you didn't have time to get to it, but we wanted to get a sense of how we should be guiding this conversation today, because there is truly just so much to talk about and we could be here all day. So we're going to share with you now some of the things that you told us. So one of the questions we asked was, how are you feeling about the changes to the NDIS that you've heard about? And we wanted to get a sense of just how people in the room are feeling. So one of the comments was confused, scared, frustrated, disappointed. I think a lot of people can relate to that. Another was very, very worried and distressed, raged over the excessive ministerial powers and the removal of the rights to review and oversight. It's a really good point. I'm scared for all the people I support and work with disability. It is terrifying for them just waiting and not knowing how the bill will affect them. Will they still have good access to the community, work, and the activities they enjoy? If they do receive cuts, how will this affect their health and well-being? I think that one touches on the uncertainty, which is, I think, a thing a lot of us can relate to. Yeah, comprehensive. I need to learn more. I feel uninformed. Hopefully today can help with that. We also asked you what changes you're most interested in hearing about in today's events and asked you to share questions with us ahead of time. We won't go through those responses now because we want to have as much time as possible for the speakers to cover those questions in the event. But rest assured, they have informed our discussion today. Now, Todd, you're going to be talking to us about some of the changes to NDIS planning.
There's a lot to get through. I try and be as slow as possible, but understand that there is a lot of messy information going forward. So let's get into it. Also, before I begin, just a reminder that you can put your questions in the chat. We'll try and get to them as many as possible. So I'm going to explain some of the significant changes that have been announced, starting with the announcements about how you can have your plan changed. Right now, there are two ways you can get changes in your plan if you're not happy with it, or if your support needs are different to what they were before. The first way is through a plan variation. This is when you're asking for a small change to your plan. You can ask for a variation to change some basic things, like your personal details. For example, if you moved house and you want to change your address. You can also ask for a variation if you want a small change in funding for a specific item. The second way is through a plan reassessment. Unlike a variation, a plan reassessment scraps your old plan and you must argue for every support in a new plan. Currently, to get a plan reassessment, the NDIS has a set of criteria that you must meet. But the government wants to make this stricter. A reassessment would only happen if there was a significant and ongoing change in support needs because a person's functional capacity has changed and they can't do daily living tasks that they used to be able to do anymore. Or there's been a change in their living arrangements, education, work, or informal supports. Excuse me. Another big change is the changes to the criteria that people use for reasonable and necessary. This is how you get funding in a plan. So what the government want to do is to change some of the criteria to again make that stricter. There are a number of new things that a planner who interprets reasonable and necessary has to consider. But one of the biggest changes is that families will be expected to provide more support to children with a disability. Another big change is that if you have more than one disability, the NDIS will use different criteria that is directly related to your disability to ensure it meets NDIS eligibility rules. So that's a lot of information to take in. We're going to talk to some experts now that people with disability. I'd like to bring in two speakers, Maeve Kennedy and Emma Benenson. Maeve is the CEO of Inclusion Australia, and Emma Benenson is the CEO of Dana. Welcome, Maeve and Emma. Maeve and Emma, can you please give a visual description of yourself? Maeve, let's start with you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to be here. I'm Maeve. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in my 30s. I have brown shoulder length hair, and today I'm wearing a navy blue jumper.
Emma?
Um, yeah, thank you, Todd. I'm not going to give a visual description of myself because I don't know what I look like, but maybe you might want to have a crack, or Maeve, maybe you could have a crack.
I'll hand it over to Maeve if you don't mind.
Sorry, Maeve.
No worries at all, Emma. Emma's wearing a burgundy, a beautiful red wine color top with a lovely necklace and has brown curly hair. Thanks.
Thank you.
Emma, sorry, Maeve, we're going to start with you. What impact will these changes have specifically on people with intellectual disability?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. We've been really worried about this. Some people on the call today might be aware of some of the work that Inclusion Australia has been doing. There's lots of parts of the bill that we think will impact people with intellectual disability and their families if it goes through. But one that I might focus on is the cuts to social and community participation funding. For people with an intellectual disability and for many other people with disability, accessing the community can be really difficult. It can be hard to go out and about. I'm so sorry. I'm just struggling with my sound for.
No worries.
Can you hear me?
Maybe while Maeve's sorting it out, we can go to you, Emma. One of the
Sure.
things that I noticed when watching the Senate inquiry is that you gave very powerful testimony. Would you tell us a bit more about what you shared, particularly about the consultation process and why it is inaccessible for many people with disabilities?
Sure, thanks, Todd. Picking up on what Maeve was talking about, firstly, I think the volume of information, the legislation is over 100 pages long. And so for people with intellectual disability, in particular, the accessibility is really problematic and really concerning to us. It worries us a lot that people with intellectual disability, in particular, might not have the opportunity to, get all the information about the bill so that they can have their voices heard, rather than being filtered through other people. From a blindness perspective, I have found it very difficult, and I mentioned this when I gave my testimony, to get my head around it and get across it using screen reader and braille and so forth. And I guess that's the tip of the iceberg. It's not just the fact that the information is vast and huge, it's the fact that everybody is frightened at the same time. And so the emotional load of trying to digest really complicated, complex information whilst also being terrified. And I think what's worth noting is that it's not just people with disability sitting at home terrified. Advocates with disability are also terrified and worried. And I'm not being a drama queen when I say that. There is genuine fear in the community about these changes. And I think one of the other things I touched on is that it's scary, not just because of the changes themselves, but because it's fundamentally having an impact on the way that our communities talk about us. It's having an impact on the conversations we have around our family dinner tables, and it's having an impact on the way that we talk about disability in workplaces. So it's not an academic kind of exercise. This is real life, and it's happening to us all in real time, and that's the thing that really worries me.
Thanks, Emma. Back to you, Maeve. Emma mentioned that it's a really complicated and drawn-out process. So I would like you to finish your answer about how that might impact people with intellectual disability.
Yeah, thank you, Todd, and thanks everybody for your patience with my tech gremlins. So lots of things will impact people with intellectual disability if the bill goes through as planned. So there are things like parental responsibility, which we won't talk about in detail, which I don't have time to talk about in detail, but that's a concern. There are things like the requirements at the access and eligibility point to seek appropriate treatment. So you need to have taken appropriate treatment before you can be given access to the scheme. Now, we think that the agreement between the Greens and the government yesterday has mitigated that one. That means has addressed it a little bit, but we're still waiting to see the detail. What I really wanted to focus on was actually the Disability Royal Commission and the fact that the department's submission to the inquiry says that this bill responds to the findings of the Royal Commission and is informed by them, but we can't see any evidence of that. Actually, we see that some things are pretty much exactly the opposite. So what I was going to talk about earlier around the social and community participation cuts, or what one of the support categories that's been talked about already for a support determination, where the minister can make a blanket determination that everybody's plan gets cut in a particular category. That will impact people's access to the community. Now, the Disability Royal Commission specifically found that community access and inclusion is crucial for safety, and that isolation and lack of connection, lack of opportunity to engage, lack of relationships, and environments where that happens to people are unsafe. So we are very concerned that not only is this bill not fully capturing the findings of the Royal Commission, it is actually going against them, and some of the changes risk making people less safe.
Well, I want to follow up on those comments, Emma, and talk about what is known as a consultation process. A lot of politicians have been using that phrase and another phrase, co-design, very often during these proceedings and the development of the bill. But what is actually a good consultation process? And what will you be advocating for, Emma, as part of your role? We'll start with you, Emma, and then Maeve, we'll go to you.
Thank you, Todd. I just want to pick up on what Maeve said about safety too, because I just want to add that it disproportionately impacts women as well, women with disability. In terms of the so-called consultation processes, we're really worried about this, not just the process that we're currently in, but what happens in the event that the bill actually passes through Parliament. And then if it does, there are numerous reforms and changes that the government will be consulting on at the same time. And so what that means is that, well, firstly, we'll all get extremely tired, although I think we're all extremely tired already. and when I say we, I mean people with disability. I think that a good consultation looks like plenty of time for people to actually understand the information that we're being given. Genuine consultation would look like, some of you will remember the NDIS review process that took place a few years ago, where the review team went around and sat down with people, met people where they were at, and had genuine conversations with people about the scheme and how it was working. That's the kind of process that we really need here when we're being asked to agree and to support massive changes to our lives, not a public consultation that kind of goes up on a website. We all get to write a submission. Some of us do that more creatively than others. I wrote a song, but that is not consultation. That's box ticking. Real consultation is actually sitting down with people and having genuine conversations with people, and that is what we will always advocate for, because it's the most accessible and the least harmful and the most trauma-informed approach, which is what's needed here.
So, Maeve, what else has been missing from the consultation process discussion? If you were in a room with the politicians deciding the fate of the legislation, how would you go about addressing the consultation process to make sure everybody's voice is being heard?
Thanks, Todd. It's a really good question. I probably have two answers to that. So the first is, if we were in a room with the politicians 3 months ago, I would have said, please show us and talk to us before you introduce a bill of hundreds of pages into Parliament without telling anyone, because we didn't know what was in that before it was introduced, just like anybody else in our community didn't. So even as funded disability representative organisations, we only got the detail when it was introduced in Parliament. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is what the government talks about with intention. So it's not the intent of the bill to cause harm, or it is the intent of the bill to make it more sustainable. Intention and impact are really different. And sometimes there can be consequences that are genuinely unintended that still happen and still have a really negative impact on people's lives. The point of robust policy processes and including lived experience is to avoid unintended consequences and to recognise that people with disability are the experts in their own lives. And this applies to any social service system. If you are the recipient of a service, or if you are the person about whom decisions are being made, you should be involved in that process. That makes better policy, as well as being fairer and more in line with human rights. So we think that some of the really bad things in the bill that we think will cause harm could have been avoided if there was consultation at the beginning. And that's what I would have said if we were 3 months in the past. What I would say now is, let's use the next 8 weeks well. We don't want to be in the same position. A good comment about that, about the report that came out yesterday. We don't want to be in a position in 8 weeks where they say, great, you had extra time to be heard, let's press on regardless. What we want is genuine change. We want to be listened to. And 8 weeks is not enough time to consult genuinely with people with intellectual disability around Australia, especially people with more complex support needs, living in shared settings and closed settings like group homes, and people without access to communication support. So if we are thinking about the people for whom the scheme was originally designed, to use the government's language, there are some people who are not able to participate in public consultation processes. Just like Emma said, if you pop something online and assume you've done your job because you are now welcoming written submissions, that doesn't work for probably the majority of people, to be honest, let alone people who use alternative forms of communication or who don't use English. So we need to think about targeted engagement mechanisms and the role of representative organisations. Inclusion Australia and our team have done a lot of really focused work with people with disability who live in group homes, who work in supported employment settings, who don't otherwise have the opportunity to participate in government consultations, and then bringing those messages back to government. Because the other thing is effective consultation needs to be done in an environment of trust. People have already put on the chat, we're worried about what government would do with our data. That's real. So we're calling for government to involve trusted organisations, funded disability representative organisations, and really targeted methods of engagement to make sure that we can get this right in the next 8 weeks.
Thanks, Maeve. I'm going to welcome back Sarah now so we can have an audience Q&A with Emma and Maeve. Unfortunately, they won't be able to stay the whole time because they have another very important meeting to get to. But please put all your questions for them in the chat. Even if we don't get to them, we'll make a note of them. A question from Shy to Emma. What is the purpose of postponing the bill? As we know, the inquiry was extended yesterday, so the bill has been delayed. What do you think the purpose of that was?
Well, I hope that the purpose of that was exactly what we've just been talking about, to genuinely allow more time for scrutiny of the over 4,000 submissions, which I understand were received by the committee. So I'm hoping that means that there'll be more time for scrutiny of those submissions. There'll also be more time to think about, what amendments and changes can be made to the bill to make it work better. Because, the reality is that there's a high likelihood that it will pass in some form. All of what we've seen so far points in that direction. But what we want to make sure is that if it does pass, that it passes with some changes to it that make it better than what it is now. So my hope is that there'll be much more time for scrutiny, for people to really look closely at it, to think about what Maeve was talking about before, the unintended and perhaps even intended consequences of the bill, and to really get it right from the start.
Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. So we've got a question from Anne for Maeve. So there's a lot of confusion about the community participation budgets being reduced by 50%. So the deal with the Greens mentioned that this will not happen for people needing like medical support, etc. However, if this goes ahead, will everyone's plan just be automatically cut on October 1st, or does it happen when you go to plan reassessment?
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Anne. That's a really good question, and it's a question that we've actually asked the department and the government ourselves. So I'm not fully across the detail of the agreements and what came out yesterday, but what we understand about the support determinations mechanism that has been introduced in the legislation, which is the way that the social and community participation cuts would happen. So it's not just about cutting social and community participation, it's a power that would be given to the minister to make what is called support determinations, and they could be other categories in the future of old framework plans, which is a level of technical detail that we could spend a whole lot more time talking about. This is why we need the time to talk about it, because it's so complicated and confusing. What would happen is that October the 1st is the first date that it would happen, but the changes, so the social and community participation cuts would roll out progressively from then. So there's no way actually in the law, which is great, to just cut everybody's plans on day one and then that's done. It has to be done at the next point in which your plan would be looked at. So it will start from the 1st of October and roll out at any assessment or review point from then on.
Thank you, Maeve. That's really good to know. I think we're going to thank Maeve and Emma now. It's wonderful to hear your wisdom, and thank you for taking the time.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Of course. So I'm going to be talking a little bit now about some of the changes that are happening to eligibility. And then we'll go on to our next speaker. So eligibility means your ability to access a support based on rules. And these rules decide whether you can access things like the NDIS or what supports you get funding for. So from January 2028, the NDIS eligibility requirements will tighten. This is if the new legislation passes. And what that will mean is that existing, so current and future participants will need to do an eligibility reassessment to see if they meet the new rules. Then there are two main things the government is proposing changing. So one of them is how the NDIA decides if a disability is permanent, and the other is how the NDIA defines and tests how significant a person's disability is, or in other words, in jargony words, their level of functional capacity. So let's look at permanent disability. Currently, as the rules are now, people can only access the NDIS through the disability stream if they have a permanent disability. And a disability is considered permanent if a person has tried all known, available, and appropriate evidence-based treatments. Now, the government wants to change this. So people will have to show they've tried all appropriate treatments, but it won't be taken into consideration whether the treatment is available to that person. An appropriate treatment is defined as in the law as a treatment that is evidence-based, can be reliably expected to reverse, alleviate, or improve the impact of an impairment, and is regularly used in Australia. So the government has said that people receiving ongoing treatments can still be considered to have a permanent disability. The government has also said that they won't expect people to do a treatment if there's a medical reason why they can't. And we've heard yesterday, as part of this deal that Emma and Maeve were talking about before, that people won't be expected to take medication that changes how they behave, or as it's sometimes called, a restrictive practice. And the government is also making a list of treatments that people will not have to be required to do before accessing the NDIS. We don't have that list yet, but I see a question in the chat about cochlear implants, and we believe that the minister has said that they will be on the list. But when deciding whether a disability is permanent, the NDIA won't be able to consider if the treatment is available in the person's location, if the person can afford the treatment. But it was also reported yesterday that the treatment will have to be part of the public healthcare system. And the NDIA also won't be able to consider any other personal circumstances. Moving on to functional capacity. Functional capacity refers to things a person can and can't do. People with disability might have reduced functional capacity in some areas of life. So to access the NDIS, currently, people need to show they have a significantly reduced functional capacity. And as we all know, that's quite a subjective test. The government wants to define functional capacity in the law as if whether a person can do an activity without any help from other people, assistive technology, or modifications, and in an environment that doesn't take into account their personal context or circumstances. So it doesn't take into account how much informal support they receive, where they live. They say this is to measure a person's intrinsic ability. I've always thought that sounds a bit like a superpower, but anyway. The government also plans to make rules which say what assessment tools they will use to measure a person's functional capacity and the threshold or level of functional capacity that will qualify someone to access the NDIS. Okay, there's a lot of information there, but now I'm going to bring on our next speakers. So, and just a reminder to please put as many questions as you can in the chat, and we'll hopefully get to as many of them as possible. Let me introduce Luke Nelson. Luke is a self-advocate who has been active in the disability sector for 18 years. Luke is a policy officer at Inclusion Australia. I'd also like to invite Riley Buchanan from Inclusion Australia to join us. Thank you. Hi, so can we get a visual descriptor from both of you, please?
Thanks, Sarah. So I am wearing a grey jumper. I have well, it used to be brown, it's going a little bit grey now. And I'm wearing glasses. And I'm in my late 30s.
Thanks. Thank you. And Riley?
Hi, everyone. My name's Riley. I am a 30-year-old woman with fair skin. I have on a white jumper, which I've managed to keep clean today, which is a miracle. And I have long, dark hair. Great to be here. Thanks.
Keeping a white jumper clean. Amazing. So first question to you, Luke. How do you think these changes to the NDIS will impact people with intellectual disability?
It will be hard for people because people will be scared whether they're going to meet the criteria for the scheme. Also, to my knowledge, there is no treatment for, say, cerebral palsy, which I have, which is a lifelong condition. Okay. Now, there'll be a lot of people probably thinking in their heads on this call, watching us, going, well, the disability I have, to my knowledge, I have no idea whether it's treatable or not because it's a lifelong condition. So the government is asking our community to prove that we are still disabled. And it's, in my view, it's insulting.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of fear about what treatments people will be expected to undergo. Luke, you also presented evidence at the Senate committee on the NDIS changes. And we've just got a wonderful quote from you that I'm going to embarrass you by reading out. So the NDIS was designed for people with disability to live ordinary lives. I live an ordinary life because of the support I receive from the NDIS. If these cuts go ahead, I'm afraid that people with an intellectual disability and their family will lose their human rights. So, Luke, I just wanted to ask if you could expand on that a bit and tell us a bit more about what inspired you to say that.
Yep. So basically, people with disabilities, we have a right to work. So if these cuts go through, we have a right to be a taxpayer. We have a right to contribute to society. We have a right to go out into our community, have a right to have friends, have partners, have relationships. If these changes go through, it will affect people's lives. It will affect the rights that people with disabilities have now. And one thing, and I'm not afraid to say this, okay? Now, I've been doing this for 17 years. I'm afraid that people with disabilities, okay, will be worse off because of the changes the NDIS minister wants to make or the NDIS bill will make. And look, I'm not afraid to say that I'll be frightened. I'm not afraid to say that for the first time in my life, I looked at the changes and I went, this could be a really scary time for our community.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you say that because I think you're reflecting what a lot of people are feeling. And I guess like social and community participation, it's leaving the house. It's things people without disability take for granted. And we should all be able to take for granted. Riley, I wanted to know if you had anything to add about like what some of your concerns are.
Yeah, thank you. Riley speaking. Yeah, Luke, that was such a powerful line, Sarah, that you just quoted, and you spoke incredibly powerfully, as many people did during the public hearings. I think that point about the intent of the NDIS for people to live an ordinary life is such an important one because we are hearing plenty from government And, also in the committee report that was released last night, about how these changes being put forward are supposedly in line with the intent of the NDIS, or are aimed to bring the NDIS and how it operates back in line with its original intention. But Luke, as you pointed out, like that is at the heart of the NDIS, to enable people to live ordinary lives, and the very things that this bill is putting forward and what will happen as a result of that really undermines and completely goes against that idea for people to be able to live an ordinary life on an equal basis with others. So I think that's a really huge contradiction in terms of the kinds of messages that we're hearing from ministers and other parts of government too. So I think that's what I'd add for now. I think you said it really, really well, Luke.
Just on that point, Riley, just if I can, let's not forget that originally the NDIS, back in when it was trialed and rolled out, was the fact that this is able to give people the assurances that they're able to live their lives so that their families become families, not so much support or carers or unpaid support. So I apologize for the terminology. If this bill goes through, okay, we're going back to what it said it wouldn't do. So we've got a lot of work to do, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Luke. And I think intent of the scheme has become such a trigger word for me personally, because we've just like, with the intent of the scheme is quite clear in the original act, and it includes like supporting people to access the community, live ordinary lives, as you said, and also like supporting like children with developmental delays and everything that's written in the original act. So we've actually got a bit of time to take some questions from the audience, and Todd is going to come back and join us. Thank you. And the first question for Luke, and I think this is a question that is on a lot of people's minds. What can we do to stop these changes going ahead? How could we take action?
Great question. So, talk to your MP, talk to your organisations. Guys, get involved. Get involved, and there's great opportunities, and also write a submission. It doesn't have to be a 30-page document. It can be a video submission. It can be any kind of submission, and get it to the government. And it's a lot. We've got to work together on this. But I will say this: never be afraid to ask for support, and never be afraid to ask your organisations for encouragement or to be part of something.
Yeah, and never be afraid to ask for support is such an important key message there as well.
That's great advice, Luke. I've got another question for you and for Sarah from Pam. Who are they planning to remove from the scheme? They are saying over 200,000 people, so they must have some idea of who is being targeted. Luke, do you want to have a go first, and then we'll move over to Sarah?
Yeah, I'll have a go, and please, Riley, jump in if you want to say anything. So my understanding is, and this is where I rely on my manager, that they are looking at children and people with autism, and I can't remember the other one. This is where I'm relying on my other colleagues to jump in. Yeah. Riley.
Sarah, would you like to jump in there?
Yeah.
So we know that they're developing the Thriving Kids program for kids with low to moderate support needs with autism and developmental delay. That's for kids under 8. So we can expect that those kids will not be supported by the NDIS anymore. Beyond that, because they haven't given us a lot of information, we don't really know at this stage. And I think that not knowing has made a lot of people afraid. Riley, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Only that I think this would not be news to anybody here, I'm sure, but there's a lot of people with an intellectual disability, people I know personally, who are currently not on the NDIS and are trying very hard to get on the NDIS. And so just to say, I guess that, some of the issues around eligibility and access right now are not working well. So it's absolutely like, of course, there's great concern within the community in terms of who's going to be moved off and who isn't. And it doesn't kind of bode very well that, and hopefully I'm getting this right, but if memory serves, when the bill was initially introduced and there was that modelling in the explanatory memorandum, which then had to be corrected or ended up being a little bit different when we came around to Senate estimates. And I remember Jenny McAllister kind of, as a result of getting some questions from different senators, had to clarify precisely what that number would be. And it kind of showed that the initial numbers that the government put forward didn't seem quite right, actually. And so, yeah, I think that's also very, Luke, you mentioned the word insulting before. Like at a bare minimum, can we at least expect that we have clear, accessible,
Yeah.
factual
English.
information, which we have not had. And so I think that only exacerbates, for good reason, like people's fears and also ability to engage and to have kind of meaningful input in terms of what the next step should be. Because if we're not able to have information that we can really trust and is accessible and timely and all of the things, it also adds other layers of barriers on for the community in terms of actually being able to engage with MPs or, in other consultation processes. So thank you.
I have a question here about parental supports. Sarah, because I work with you, I know that you've written extensively about that on the DSE website. But Luke, feel free to jump in if you want to answer. And this question says, I know people who are carers with intellectual disability and NDIS participants who care for people, and I am a parent with an intellectual disability. I work a lot and have a chronic health condition. I'm an NDIS participant, and I know many, many people are in similar situations. So, Sarah, where can people find information about this? And can you tell us a bit more about parental responsibility?
Yeah, this is a big concern. I know it's a big concern for a lot of people. So, in terms of what the bill says, it says that parents, the NDIS will recognise that parents are responsible for providing substantial support to their child. I don't think that will come as a surprise to any parents to know that they are providing substantial support. But the concern is it defines substantial support quite broadly. And we know that when a child has a disability, or when the parent has a disability, or when both has a disability, it can go beyond the support needed to be provided, can go beyond regular parental responsibilities. Unfortunately, I don't have a great deal of advice to offer you, but I would say it's a good idea to gather good evidence about the support you are providing, the support you will be able to continue to provide, and the support you need to be able to continue to look after your child to the standard that you want to be able to look after your child. Sorry. A fly just went into my mouth. It's a bit gross. Sorry. It's a very serious topic, but yeah. So just gather the evidence, about as much evidence that you can about what help you need as well. And that's kind of the best way you can do to protect yourself, going forward. But yeah, no, I share your concerns. I think this is very worrying.
Great advice there, Sarah. Luke, did you have anything you wanted to add, or Riley, did you want to jump in?
Good. From me, yeah. All good.
All good? Riley?
All good. Thank you, Todd. I think that was well put. Sorry, you did very well to skate over that fly incident. I hope you're okay.
No, it's just a little fruit fly. It's just a bit gross.
So now we're going to take a 5-minute break. The break is only 5 minutes long because we want as much time as we can to take questions from the audience. And we've got another great guest to talk about the changes to ministerial power. So see you back in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone.
Hello.
We will just wait 1 second just to make sure everybody else is back. Next, I'd like to introduce Sheethal Balakrishnan. Sheethal is a disability rights lawyer with over 13 years of experience in social justice experience. She works at the Justice and Equity Centre. Sheethal, can you give us a visual description of yourself, please?
Hi, Todd. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm joining from unceded Gadigal land. I'm female, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm in my late 30s.
Sheethal, like many of us, you might have a lot of concerns about the proposed changes, but for today's event, let's talk about the top three things you're concerned about. So let's start with your first concern, changes to permanence and access. Can you describe what these means and the changes that will take place?
Yes, absolutely. And some of this Sarah did start going into. So, as Sarah explained, if the bill passes, it would change how people can get access to the NDIS. There are specific criteria that has to be met for a person to get into the NDIS. And for today, I'm just going to call that the access criteria. And the bill, as Sarah talked about, would change a couple of parts of the access criteria. And the part that's of most concern to me is about assessing whether a person's impairment is permanent. So permanent is one of those access criteria.
Your second concern is about the removal of the whole of person approach, which I'm very concerned about too. What does this mean?
Oh, thanks, Todd. Yeah, sorry. Do you mind if I just spend a little bit more time on the permanence point, if that's
Sure,
okay?
go ahead.
And then I definitely will come to whole of person because yes,
Yep.
as you said, that's my second concern.
Mm.
So the bill would change what it means for an impairment to be permanent. And the top line takeaway of what I'm about to say is this. It would probably make it harder for people to get access to the NDIS if there are treatments that could improve or reduce the impact of their impairment. And that's because the bill would require a person to try what is said in the bill as all appropriate treatments before they can access the NDIS. So this means that all treatment options would need to be explored before an impairment will be considered permanent. In practice, this could be quite unfair and exclude people from the NDIS. And maybe I'll just provide some examples of that, of how we see that unfairness happening. So,
Yes.
for example, the bill says that treatment may be appropriate regardless of a person's circumstances. So, even if a person can't afford a treatment or because they live in regional or remote areas, for example, that treatment isn't available in their area, the person would still be denied access to the NDIS. Also, there may be some people who choose not to have certain treatments, and this new strict approach would interfere with the right of people to choose what to do with their body. So as has been mentioned earlier, yesterday there have been some changes that have been agreed to by the government to include some protections around this. One of those protections would be that the treatment cannot be a restrictive practice, such as forced medication. And a second protection is that it must be a publicly funded service available through Medicare, the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, or the public health system. At this stage, we don't really have very much information about much more information about those protections that have just been agreed to yesterday. And while they may narrow the scope of the treatments a person may be required to try, I guess it doesn't deal with the issues that we foresee with this new way of assessing whether an impairment is permanent. So the concern is still that the bill would unfairly limit people's access to the NDIS, even with those protections in place.
Okay, so now let's move on to this whole of person approach. Can you explain what that means and what the changes go into?
Yes, thanks, Todd. So the whole of person approach, I guess the way I think about it is about looking at a person as a whole when considering what disability supports they should be funded for. It's particularly important for people who have multiple impairments, where only some of their impairments or one of their impairments they got access to the NDIS for. It might help if we think about a hypothetical person, because I might return to this hypothetical person a bit later as well. So say this hypothetical person got access to the NDIS for a psychosocial disability. But they also might experience something like chronic pain. So a whole of person approach would consider that they may need to see a psychologist for that psychosocial disability and also for their chronic pain if it impacts their psychological well-being. The whole of person approach also involves looking at other circumstances of the person, for example, maybe where they're located, so where they live. And in 2024, so 2 years ago, the disability community fought really hard and won. So they succeeded in convincing the government that the NDIA should take a whole of person approach to funding supports. And that was a really big win. But unfortunately, this bill reverses that win to take out the whole of person approach. And the change would basically mean that the NDIA will only fund supports that directly relate to an impairment that a person got access to the NDIS for. So this would require the NDIA to essentially link each support to the person's specific impairment. And this is probably going to be quite difficult to do as it involves making judgments about complex areas of people's lives. And if we go back to that hypothetical person that I talked about earlier, this would essentially require the NDIA to determine which parts of psychology support directly relate to the person's psychosocial disability and which don't. And it's not really realistic for that to be done, and keeping in mind that these judgments are being made by NDIA staff rather than, say, a qualified health professional.
We've already had a number of questions about ministerial powers in the chat, so let's move to that. Ministerial powers mean that the minister has the power to make decisions about the NDIS and people's support. These changes give the NDIS minister more power to cut support and put strict limits on funding. Sheila, what impact will this have on people with a disability?
So I might just begin first by providing maybe a bit of background on the ministerial powers. And
Sure.
the bill would present a number of different ways in which the minister would have greater powers. And I'm going to talk about probably the one that's of biggest concern just because of the time we have at the moment.
Sure.
But before I go into that, I guess I'll also say that the powers that the minister have are for powers to use in the future. So at this point, we also don't have certainty of exactly how that power will be used. So a minister, whether that's the current minister or a future minister, would have a lot of discretion based on something that we're just not certain about at the moment. The power that's probably of biggest concern to me and has been discussed a lot are support determinations, which would allow the minister to reduce the funding available for certain groups of supports. In terms of how that might work, the minister would decide a percentage amount by which funding in that group of support would be reduced by. So in the government's explanation for the bill, they gave an example of a participant who's been assessed as needing $40,000 for social and community participation. And if the minister makes a support determination to reduce social and community participation by 25%, then that participant will only have $30,000 of funding for that purpose. And so this percentage reduction, if I can call it that, applies at a scheme-wide level in a way that overrides what has been assessed as being reasonable and necessary for that person. So the minister has been saying that this would apply to social and community participation. And again, yesterday, the government agreed that this particular power, the support determination power, would be limited to social and community participation. So this kind of reduction wouldn't then apply to other groups of supports like daily living, consumables, and assistive tech. But I guess even with this more narrow scope, support determinations really shift away from the NDIS taking an individualized approach to funding participants, with the real focus of the change being about reducing the government's spending on the NDIS. And that's a really big shift and something that we're really concerned about.
Thanks, Cecil. I'm going to bring Sarah back into the conversation now because we're going to take questions from the audience. First, I'd like to start with a question from Chris about the ministerial powers. So, follows on from what you were talking about there, Cecil. Are powers like this common? And they were really shocked by them. Is it naive to think they were surprised by this? Or is it something we see in the course of average legislation?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question, Kerith. I think that it's a really good question. I'll say broadly that it's common for laws to grant powers to ministers, or to I guess it's called delegated legislation. So it delegates power to someone other than Parliament to essentially sort of make rules. So that part is common, but I think the part that's perhaps very unique to this is, first of all, the NDIS is very unique. There's nothing else like it in our in the country that we live in here. And so these powers are really broad and would have really big and wide impacts on people with disability and their families and their carers. And so I think that by virtue of the concerns that have been expressed by the community, and by politicians on, some sides of the political spectrum, that in of itself tells us that these are unique powers, and that they have really broad impacts. So yeah, really good question. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to add anything to that.
No, I would just say that I guess they are definitely unique to the NDIS. Like we've never seen anything like this before. We have had a couple of questions come through on a similar topic from Helen and Jane. So what they're concerned that once people turn 65, they'll be removed from the NDIS and moved on to aged care. Will this happen? Do we know anything about that?
So we don't know for sure. There's no direct change in the bill that would do that, but the bill does as I said, there were a few different changes that are being made to access. I only really spoke about the permanence one. One of the other changes is that the bill would give power for future rules, again, rules that we haven't seen. So future rules to be made that would allow people to be excluded from the NDIS if they get supports from other systems. We don't know what other systems that might actually come within the scope of that future rule, but in the government's explanation for the bill, they do specifically call out aged care as an example of one of those other systems. So at this point in time, it's not the case that once people turn 65 that they would be removed and moved on to aged care, but the bill certainly does enable that to happen in the future if that's what the government decides to do. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, a lot of this will be determined later on based on the rules, and I think that's why we have a lot of concerns and questions at the moment. And with the aged care, we also know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and people experiencing homelessness can be eligible younger, so it could potentially impact those cohorts as well.
Thanks, Cecil, for giving us your time and your knowledge today. So thank you for that. We've got some breaking news, actually. We got a message from Tess from CYDA, and she says, I wanted to share that we've been in touch with the committee office today, and they've clarified that they're not officially reopening for submissions, but will consider accepting more submissions direct via email. So if you want to get a submission in, you will have to contact the committee office, and I'll get our back of house team to perhaps put that email in the comments. Sarah, over to you now.
Yes, and I'll just say that just because even if they don't formally open submissions doesn't mean you can't make your voice heard in many ways. Okay, so I'd like to bring in our next speaker, Kelly Trelaw. So Kelly is actually the director of the Disability Dialogue. And welcome, Kelly. Can you give us a brief visual description of yourself?
I sure can. Just let me get my notes up. Sorry, well, I don't need that for my visual description. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Kelly. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a disabled person, and I've also recently become the director of the Disability Dialogue. So a visual descriptor is, and I'm in my early 50s. I've got dyed red hair in a blunt fringe, and I've got bright green glasses, big shiny earrings, and blue headphones on today. And I'm also wearing a black top, which is probably covered in cat hair. Thank
Everything
you.
I own is covered in cat hair. There's nothing you can do. You have to just surrender to it. So,
Right, I just look like a Lamington, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Kelly, what I wanted to ask you is what these changes are likely to mean for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with disability.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, and I know a couple of people have already mentioned that. Look, I think there's a whole heap of things that did not happen when the government was considering how these amendments would impact people and impact people who experience other forms of discrimination and marginalisation, and how that mixes with their experience of disability and their access needs. So we sometimes call this intersectionality, where someone might experience discrimination for another reason and also because of their disability. And when it kind of merges together, it creates a new form of, or a compounded form of marginalisation. So this can include, I know Maeve, actually I think it's Maeve spoke about women. I think, and Emma did as well, people from different cultural backgrounds where English isn't their main language or their first language, people from LGBTIQA, SB plus communities, and what I'm going to really briefly talk about, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people, including those in remote communities. So I know I've only got a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to really talk. There's a number of ways this bill will impact First Nations people. I'm going to mention a couple here and just use them as examples, but there will be a whole heap.
Hello.
So the first one is, sorry, let me just get up my notes.
Imagine you had a bit to choose from.
Yeah, there are, look, absolutely. Going through them, I'm like, yeah, I'm just picturing somebody I know, out in the remote community, like how they're going to access any of this. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in remote communities already have a hard enough time accessing the scheme. And I'm just going to throw back to what Sheethal was saying around it was the appropriate treatments. So the bill says you can't be assessed as having a permanent disability if there's a treatment that could help. And it says it doesn't actually matter if you can't actually get that treatment because of money or location. So in remote communities, that treatment is often not available at all. There's often no allied health or specialists, even a GP for months on end. So if we're talking about you can't be assessed as having a permanent disability and therefore can't access the NDIS because there may be some arbitrary treatment that could help you. If you're in Derby and it's available in Perth, that doesn't matter. It also says the NDIS can say no if another service could meet your needs when we're talking about alternative service systems. But what does that look like from a culturally safe perspective? Are they actually relevant? Are they funded properly? Are they in communities where people can access them? And are they fit for purpose? So that's one of the big ones. One of the ones that really concerns me, in amongst all of them, is the suspending and revoking after contact attempts. So this falls under two different bits. And so basically what this means is the CEO can suspend a participant plan if they've made reasonable attempts to contact the person for information and the person isn't contactable. And then with revocation, They can also revoke someone's participant status entirely. So rather than suspending, kick them off the NDIS. If reasonable attempts to contact them have failed for the same kind of information requests as before, or if a plan has already been suspended for at least 90 days. Now, this contactability idea and the reasonable attempts to contact assumes things that often don't hold up in remote communities. You know, a working phone number on file, a mail delivery, mobile reception, someone checking a letterbox regularly, sometimes people having a letterbox. English as a first language for whatever notice gets sent. There's a whole heap of reasons there why that is going to really significantly impact mob on the scheme. Yeah, and so none of that is guaranteed in a remote context, and someone can lose access to the scheme entirely through a communication breakdown that has nothing to do with their actual support needs, their eligibility, or any of that. So they're probably the two that are, I guess, the easiest to talk to, but I think it really goes back. I want to land on these amendments were developed without any consideration of how they would impact a whole number of people. And I think that's something we really need to push back on, you know, over this time that we've got now, to campaign around making sure, you know, it's nothing for us by us needs to actually, without us, sorry, needs to actually be, embedded in what they're doing. So
I think you make some really good points, and that's why like consultation takes a long time when done well and co-designed, because you do consider how it will impact like multiple groups of people. And this has been a rush process.
Absolutely.
Todd, I believe.
To wrap up, we're going to bring everybody back to answer some Q&A from the audience. So welcome back to Luke, Riley, Sheethel, and hello, Melissa. Melissa is from Dana and will be joining us for this Q&A session to substitute for Emma, who had to leave early. Melissa, welcome. Can you please give a brief visual description of yourself?
Hi everyone, Melissa speaking. My name is Melissa Hayon. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Manager at Dana. I am a 40-year-old woman with glasses, and I've got brown blondie hair, and I'm currently wearing a pink and orange jumper. It's lovely to be here.
Thanks, Melissa. To start, we've got a question from Maddie. If the treatment is available via the public health system, but the participant lives in a regional area with a high waiting list, does this mean they'll need to wait many years? Could be up to 10 or more before getting access to the NDIS. Let's throw that over to you, Sheethal, and then we'll go around the panel.
Yeah, thanks so much for that question, Maddie. As I said when I was speaking earlier, the bill specifically says that a person will need to try all appropriate treatment regardless of their circumstances, which, as you've pointed out, includes where a person lives. And so I'd say the blunt answer to your question is yes, that person would be denied access to the NDIS if there is a treatment available to them, and regardless of the fact of where they live, that there's a big wait list. The only sort of qualifier I'll put to my blunt answer is that there are rules that will be made that, again, made in the future, so we don't know what they will say, but those rules will provide some exceptions for people to not have to try all appropriate treatment. I don't know what those rules will say or what the government is actually planning for those. It might be that there's something in there that takes account of that kind of wait list, but I don't know. So I'd stick with my blunt answer, which is unfortunately, yes, they would be denied access.
Thanks, Sheethal. Does anybody else want to contribute a response there?
In that case, maybe we'll go to the next question.
Yep.
So we've got a question from Grace, and perhaps we can hear from you, Melissa, on this one. So what can people do if they're experiencing cuts to plans being made as if the bill has already passed? So cuts at the moment. Are there protections or supports for challenging this? And Grace also says that she's hearing about this so much, and planners are telling people they've been instructed to enact cuts already.
Thank you for the question, Melissa speaking. So it is very clear, and it's been made very clear by all parties, NDIA, DHDA, everybody, that these changes have not yet passed. So everything that has already been in the old plan, that's still the same now. So, and if you have like received any correspondence from the NDIA saying they're kicking you off, or there's mistakes in your plan, or there's any other issues, you are still entitled to go back and say, I need to change, I need to do a reassessment, I need this reviewed. And if you run into trouble, you can always contact a disability advocate to help you navigate those systems. So it's really important to remember that none of these changes have passed yet. And we won't, and until that happened, we still need to stick to what the old plans are saying and what the old processes are.
Thanks,
And when the law,
Thank
when the law
you,
does
Melissa.
pass, I was just going to add, when the law does pass as well, not everything comes into effect at the same time. So some changes will still be later.
Yes, for our final question, I want to throw it open to Luke and Kelly. Luke, if you want to go first, do you think the new community fund of $200 million that will be could potentially replace community supports? Do you think that $200 million that the government has advocated is enough?
Luke, do you want to should we argue over who goes first on this one, or?
Yeah, I will go to Cal first.
Sure, go ahead,
No
Kelly.
worries. Look, bluntly, is it enough? Absolutely not. We also don't know what that really is going to look like and how it could fit any of those gaps. I know 200, it sounds like a lot. For those of us who have had to get government grants and deliver projects or programs, it's not going to go very far at all when we're talking about how many people are going to need supports.
Luke, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask about your own individual experience.
Yep.
What would the cuts in community funding mean for you on a daily basis?
Well, put it like this. I would seriously have to look at my lifestyle in terms of I use most of my funding for work, but also to travel and do things in family. So I would have to look at my lifestyle. So it would affect my life a bit, I think, but also just in relation to your other answer, what you can't put a number on freedom. So even though $200 million sounds like a lot, it's really not a lot of money. What is a price to freedom? What is a price that for disability people to live their life? $200
Yeah,
million is
there's
not
a
enough.
reason why they're cutting the budget and replacing it with something else that's much cheaper.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It's just the dollars and cents of it, isn't
That's
it,
right.
really? Over to you, Sarah, to wrap up.
Yeah, I absolutely love that point, Luke. You can't put a price on freedom. I think that's a wonderful note to finish on. So I want to really thank everyone so much. This has been a really interesting conversation. I think it's been helpful for the audience too. Thank you to our amazing speakers, Maeve, Emma, Luke, Riley, Melissa, Kelly. I know there's been a lot to digest today, and there's a lot more we could have covered. I'm so sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but we have collected all the questions from the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them after the event in an email. Thank you for everyone who's contributed in the chats, in the comments today. Before we go, I do just want to tell you about next month's Open Dialogue events, which will be a feature dialogue. So the feature dialogue is a project run by the Disability Dialogue. It's all about the disability community leading the conversation and coming up with ideas for how to solve the problems that we face. This feature dialogue will be looking at foundational supports and what they should look like. There are two big and exciting ideas that have been developed as part of this project, and it's now time to present these ideas back to you and get your feedback and thoughts on how to do them better. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. So register today. The link will be in the chat, and this event will be on Wednesday, the 29th of July. We'd love for you to join us there.
As always, we really want to hear what you thought about today's events. So if you have a few moments to complete the survey, we would really love that. The survey will automatically pop up on your screen as the event finishes, but we'll also pop the survey in the chat. The survey is also available in easy read. Thank you so much to everyone for being a part of this event today. We hope to see you for the next one. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.